house, and if any Indian tries to stop me, I'll blast him.
You know, the only thing more pathetic than Indians on TV is Indians watching Indians on TV.
Hey everybody, it's Ian, back again for another episode of Native Film Talk. How's it going? Back this week for Indian in the Cupboard. With a title like The Indian in the Cupboard, what could go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? I heard some people reminisce about the movie online and just the rabbit hole of YouTube comments and blog comments about this movie. And some people made the suggestion, well, I think it would have been better received today if they renamed it to Native American in the Cupboard. Really, dude. Anyway, Indian in the Cupboard, directed by Frank Oz. If you don't know who Frank Oz is, you know his work for sure. Frank Oz was famous from the Muppets. He was Fozzie Bear, Miss Piggy, Bert from Sesame Street, Cookie Monster from Sesame Street. He was Grover, and he was Animal from the Muppets as well. And his most famous role, he was Yoda in the original Star Wars films. So he also had previously directed Dark Crystal, Little Shop of Horrors, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, and What About Bob, which is a great movie. If you haven't seen it, go watch that one. That's a Bill Murray movie. So in that order, those are his first four movies: Dark Crystal, Little Shop of Horrors, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, What About Bob, and then Indian in the Cupboard. He was batting 1,000 until he got to this movie and laid an absolute egg. This movie is not good. So, spoiler alert, I don't like this movie. But full disclosure, I loved this movie when I was a kid. I love is a strong word. I liked it. I remember having the VHS, and I enjoyed it. The VHS was unique. For those of you that actually had the movie, it had the VHS tape was one of those big, like, Disney ones. It was a big plastic case, and you could actually flip the cover inside out. And it was the Indian in the Cupboard on one side, and you flipped it out, and it was like a printed cupboard from the movie. And it came with a little plastic little bear, and it came with a key. So you could, like, literally play Indian in the Cupboard, like, reenact the movie and play. Because I thought that was pretty cool. That was, like, the only time I ever saw a movie be interactive with their VHS, and I thought, like, that was cool. That was, like, one that actually stuck out to me, because as soon as I got it, I flipped the cover, and I had it on the cupboard side the entire time I owned it. And who knows what happened to that thing now. I hope it freaking burned. Anyway, this was written by Melissa Matheson, who also wrote Black Stallion and E.T. So once again, they were set up for success, seemingly. This movie was originally, unfortunately, slated to be a 5-part movie series. This is initially based on, thank God they didn't do that, right? This was initially based on a book by Lynn Reed Banks. Listen to these titles. So she wrote 5 of these things, so they were going to base all 5 on her books. So the first one came out in 1980, The Indian in the Cupboard. Next, The Return of the Indian, The Secret of the Indian, The Mystery of the Cupboard, and the last one, The Key to the Indian, which came out after this movie in 1998. One of those should have been The Indian Strikes Back with those freaking titles, but the Indian in the Cupboard was actually incorporated into curriculum, like school curriculum, in 1980. This book itself was critically acclaimed in the New York Times. It fell under the Best Books for Children, and it was called the Best Novel of the Year. And it said the first book had a fine balance between childish desire to play with the tiny figures and awareness that, though small, they were real people who ought to not be so manipulated. Advocates for book praise the novel on aspects of convincing characters, reader captivation, and enchantment, and keeping in touch with young readers, among other things. So no joke, this freaking thing was incorporated into like school curriculum. It was encouraged for this movie to be, I'm sorry, I keep saying movie, for that book, the very first book, to be like lauded as like, hey, this is a great book for kids to read. It gives good historical representation. It's good for the imagination. It teaches kids about like an important aspect of morality. And at 1991, 11 years later, after this movie came out, at the American Library Association National Conference, there was a couple of ladies who were former presidents of the American Library Association, listed the book and all of its sequels at that time under titles to avoid, calling them classic examples of highly acclaimed books riddled with horrendous stereotypes of Native Americans. So after that, they also said, created her Indian character from the mixed bag of harmful cliches so common among British authors. Also, they said the fact that the book's portrayal of Native Americans is seen as acceptable, implying its representation of American Indians as savages, or the way the American Indians are viewed in the mainstream, and that the role of Omri, the boy, reinforces ideas of white paternalism. And this happened in 1991 at that conference. Despite all of this, they made a movie 4 years later. My theory in 1995 is they were trying to keep up with Toy Story, which also came out in 1995. Paramount, who made this movie, probably got headwind that Pixar was coming out with Toy Story, which was their first Pixar movie. And the teaser for that came out almost like 2 years prior. So in my opinion, is they were trying to compete and try to make a toy come to life movie and just try to show, some kind of competition. And man, this movie's not as good as when I was a kid. I mean, they honestly tried. I'll get into the cast with you in a second, but they like genuinely tried. There are instances where you can see that maybe they tried to correct some of the wrongs that were in the book, or maybe the book got it right, where Little Bear lives in a teepee, or Omri, the boy in the film, tries to get Little Bear to live in a teepee, and he does reluctantly, but the next day he's just like, hey bro, like we don't live in teepees, we live in longhouses. And I'm like, good on you, Little Bear. There's like small things like that, but then there's also like Indian speak, where Little Bear talks in a very regimented cadence that is representative of, and it's like, and they drop how in this movie multiple times. They never talk about it. They say savage, Indian, Redskins in a kid's movie, and Little Bear is less intelligent. He has less understanding of the world. I get it. He's supposed to be from 100 years earlier than Boone, who's the cowboy, and this is like 300 years prior to the world that we're set in the movie. But Jesus, he doesn't even understand the concept of outdoors in the movie. It's just like, jeez. Anyway, but this is a lot like Pocahontas in that it's like you get the feeling that they listened, but they had so much like corporate inertia. Like they were already going to do the movie that they made, and they just incorporated what they felt was necessary, or what they felt was, I don't know, I guess just input to say like, yeah, we listened to them and we actually like incorporated their feedback. Frankly, I think that's all it was. So let's go over the cast review. Well, as always, cast review, plot, positives, negatives, final thoughts. So let's get into it. Cast review. Hal Scardino as Omri. He only did a few films. This is like, and for good reason. He didn't do a very good job in this, but fun fact, the author who wrote the books, her son was Omri. So she actually wrote the books really initially as like a bedtime story for him, and then it got really popular. And then, drumroll, Gary Litefoot Davis as Little Bear. And he's mainly known also for playing Nightwolf in Mortal Kombat Annihilation. He had a few other acting roles, but he was mostly a rapper his entire career. And then also now he's more of a businessman. He's an executive director for the Native American Financial Services Association, CEO of Davis Strategy Group, and a member of the Forbes Finance Council. So he is, from the world of acting to now, like a boss. He's legit. And he hails from the Cherokee Nation. So homie is legit. And then Rishi Bhatt as Patrick. He's his Indian friend. David Keith as Boone, a.k.a. Boohoo Boone. I mostly know him from being Mayo's friend from An Officer and a Gentleman. He's the one that like hangs himself at the end of the movie. But that's what I mostly know him from. But this, I completely forgot he was in this movie. Steve Coogan as Tommy the English medic. He's the director who steps on a landmine in Tropic Thunder. That's how I remember him. Tropic Thunder. Richard Jenkins as Victor, who is actually Dale's dad in Step Brothers. So that's where I know him most from. George Randall as the Indian chief. So he's the Mohawk chief that dies of a heart attack in the movie. He's the only other native I could find, and he has no act. He has no creds. He has nothing. I couldn't find like what tribe, what nation he hails from. But he's the only other like native person in this movie. Everything else is just like pretty much centered around Patrick and Omri. So let's get into it. The plot. This is somewhere in New York City. There's a lot of shots of the two towers. This is pre 9/11, obviously, but it's pretty interesting to see that. So that's how they make it known that you're in New York. It's like gratuitous shots of the two towers. So Omri's a 9-year-old white boy. He has a mom and dad, 2 older brothers that are like Hanson-looking wannabes. Their like hairstyle is terrible. But not gonna lie, I tried to have that same hairstyle when I was that age, so can't knock it. It opens with his 9th birthday party and is gifted a skateboard, a helmet, action figures, and like a mysterious cupboard that his brother found. His brother's like, "Don't worry, I washed it." And he gave it to them last, so this is like the drumroll gift. And Omri asks, the first thing he asks, oddly, is like, "Hey, does it have a key?" And he wants to lock it, and his mom randomly has like a bunch of keys. She's a key collector, like of skeleton keys, ever since she was a little girl. It's a really random thing that's never explained. But he's like, "Yeah, so if, later on we'll try all these keys, and if one works, you can keep it." And then Omri takes off. He's like, "Okay, well, screw this, cupboard right now. I want to go play on my skateboard." So he takes off with his buddy Patrick, his Indian friend, and his brothers, and they go skateboard. And while out there, Omri, his Indian friend, gives him a little native figurine. So the Indian friend gives him the Indian in the movie. Huh? I bet some writer broke his freaking shoulder patting himself on the back for that. Like, that was a little too on the nose. I don't know what they were trying to accomplish there, but Patrick is so irresponsible. His Indian friend, he is so irresponsible in this movie. He's just like reckless. He's just like, his comment he gave to him, he's not a good friend either. Patrick said when he gave him Little Bear, he said, "I've got you something to celebrate your birthday. It's like an antique. It didn't do much, Just reminded me of you." And then the scene ends, and then it goes back to his house. But Patrick, he's like just all about destruction, and Omri tries to teach him like, "Hey, these are real people. There are real lives that are affected. We're taking these people from like a point in time. Like, we got to be more responsible about this." And Patrick's just like, "Screw that. I want my Indian. I want my cowboy." So I don't know, but anyway, flash to their house. The mom dumps a bunch of keys on the bed, and they finally find one. And she's like, "Yeah, my grandma gave that to me. She was dying, had nothing to leave me. So I picked up that key and I said, I want it more than anything in the whole world." And then she gave it to her. And so Omri chooses that key, picks it out of the lot, and then tries it, and it actually locks the cupboard. And he's like, "Wow, so what should we put in it?" And Omri's like, "Oh, I remember, like, Patrick gave me this today." So he runs to his jacket and his pants and then puts Little Bear in there and then locks it. And then goes to bed. And then early the next morning, Omri wakes up to a noise, and he hears it coming from the locked cupboard. He unlocks it, only to find Litefoot himself. This is the first scene we see of Little Bear. And Little Bear's, like, terrified. And Omri reaches out to touch Little Bear, and Little Bear, like, stabs him. And then he's just like, "What is going on?" And I always watch movies, this is just me. I always watch movies with subtitles. It's just, I've always, maybe now that we have a kid, I don't know. In general, I'd like to listen on lower volume and just like hear things in the house. So during this scene, when Little Bear finally talks, he speaks in Onondaga first, supposedly. I never got any fact checks on that. But in the subtitles, throughout the entire time, anytime he says anything in Onondaga, it says "speaking Iroquois." I shit you not. It says "speaking Iroquois" the entire movie. So anyway, after he speaks Iroquois, his first English words are demon when he's holding out his dagger, giant. And then Omri's interrupted by his dad to go to school, and he like closes the cupboard, and then he like closes it up, and he's just like, "Oh, I gotta get the hell out of here," and he can't wait to get back home because he's like, "Oh, he tells his buddy Patrick, I love the Indian, he's so great," and then it goes and ends, and then it really just like goes through this sequence where Omri's just like excited to get back home, and he finally does. At the end of the day, opens the cover back up, and it's back to a toy. He's like, what the heck happened? He was alive this morning. Locks the cupboard again, disappointed. He goes to bed like absolutely crushed. Doesn't even eat his dinner. He's just like destroyed. And then when he's in the room in the middle of the night, he hears the rustling again. So he opens it up. Little Bear returns. Lightfoot's back alive, and he says, is this magic? He knows English all of a sudden, and he thinks Omri's a dream. Omri's like, are you a real Indian? Little Bear, and I quote, I am Onondaga, Wolf Clan, Iroquois. Omri, Iroquois? I've heard of them. Little Bear is like so lost and confused. At this point, you just like feel for the guy. He's like, what the heck is going on in this white kid's room? But it's not even a white kid at this point to him. Like, they make Little Bear out to be this like super spiritual person. He says, and I quote, can you be the peacemaker? Omri, I'm a boy. My name is Omri. Little Bear. Great Spirit can be a child? Omri, who are you? And then Little Bear, he says his name in Onondaga, which is, he says, Okwahe? Little Bear. Little Bear? How do you know English? We know the English. They sent for us to fight the French for them. When? What year? 1761. So at this point, like, Omri wants to take Little Bear out of the cupboard onto his hand as a platform. This is like a great special effects scene. Despite it being 1995, this holds up. It doesn't look trashy at all. It looks pretty damn real. And Omri's like, you are so real. And Little Bear understands, like, at this point, like, it's magic that brought him there, and he wants to go back. Omri wants him to stay. He's he's a 9-year-old boy, of course it makes sense. And Omri's, like, trying to basically be like, no, my new friend, my little Indian friend, like, I don't want you to leave. I gotta make you stay. I'll make you comfortable. He goes into his, like, rummaging through his toy chest, and he finds a plastic, like, teepee. This kid's got, like, all kinds of toys. The array of toys this kid and his brothers have is insane. But he takes out a teepee, and a plastic teepee, and he's like, what is this? It's terrible. It's freaking plastic. And so he like puts it in the cupboard, and he can turn anything that's a toy real. And so he puts his plastic teepee into the cupboard, opens it, closes it, comes out. It's like completely made out of hide. It's like all buffalo hide or, all elk hide, whatever hide the teepee would supposed to be made out of in this scene. Like it's real. And he like reluctantly uses it. And Omri treats him, that like white paternalism that the Librarians Association was pissed about. It's true in this, because Omri's like constantly telling like Little Bear, okay, Little Bear, it's time for bed. Good night, Little Bear. And Little Bear, of course, isn't just like, all right, well, I guess it's time to sleep. He's like, what? You sleep? This place is magic. Good night. He legit said that. I wrote that down on my notes. What? You sleep? This place is magic. Good night. When Omri turns on the lights and turns off the lights, you go to Little Bear, and he's just like, oh my gosh, light. Where is this coming from? It's really like the old school, like if a person went back in time to like cavemen and pulled out a lighter and actually turned the lighter on in front of them, they all be like, oh, what a great magician. He's magic. And you get that feeling throughout this entire movie, and I really didn't like that. And so Little Bear reluctantly crawls into the teepee, and then Omri like pops all his favorite toys into this cupboard. He's like, oh man, I can have a freaking blast now. He puts Darth Vader, a T-Rex, a Robocop, like an army guy in there, opens up the cupboard, and then to find them all brawling. He panics, and just like, Darth Vader's taking swings of his lightsaber at the T-Rex. Robocop's freaking shooting guns at the army men. And then Omri closes it and panics. And I was pissed. Absolutely pissed about this scene. You know why? The trailer of this movie showed that one sequence. And I thought when I was a kid that this was going to be like, if you've ever seen Ready Player One or read the book, It's like a crossover of so many different universes of like existing just awesome stuff. I thought Indian in the Cupboard was going to be that, because they showed that freaking thing in the trailer. They made it seem like Little Bear was going to be interacting with Darth Vader and, you know, fighting dinosaurs from Jurassic Park, and RoboCop was going to be his ally or his enemy. Like, you weren't sure what was going to happen. And you go and watch the movie, none of that crap happened. This was the only sequence where that happened. They fooled me. But anyway, so next day, Omri wakes up. Little Bear is next to his bed. Great Omri, it's a new day. The day came without you. Can you do more magic? More plastic things? Like what? A white man's gun. No way. What else? Make King George. I'd like to see him. I don't have any king toys. Where's your fire? How does your wife cook? We're inside. We can't have fire. And I don't have a wife. Then Omri asks, like, Little Bear, you know, if he has a wife. And then it just gets super depressing. And Little Bear's just like, I had a wife, but she died. And then after that, you know, Omri's like, I can't give you a gun. That's dangerous. But then immediately after he shoots all of Little Bear's ideas down, he's like, oh man, I'll make you a bow and arrow. No gun. You know, I'm not going to give you a gun, but I'll give you a bow and arrow. And so Little Bear says, like, at this sequence, like, Omri runs to his toy box. He's looking for any of his toys that have bow and arrows. And Omri is corrected by Little Bear, and he's like, and I need a longhouse too. I need tools to build a longhouse. You know, Onondaga don't sleep in teepees. He tells Omri, he's like, it's the mother's house, the clan home. Because Omri's like, what's a longhouse? I never heard of that. I've only heard of teepees. And then next Omri's like, okay, I can get you tools and a horse. I can make you a horse. Because Indians need a freaking horse, right? That's what that crap's all about. And even Little Bear, he looks at him like, what the hell I need a horse for? I got legs, I can walk. And that's the problem in this movie is because it's interactions between a kid, a 9-year-old boy, and Little Bear, who is supposedly from 1761, he has no awareness of, like, present day. There's no corrections of anything. There's just, like, reactions. It's all subtle. As an adult, you can watch it, and you can see Little Bear's like, the hell, what are you, stupid? Like, I don't need a horse. I got legs. Like, the stereotype of horses and Indians going together, like, just completely goes over his head. Like, he has no recognition that it's, like, a stereotype. He's just like, I got legs, bro. I don't need a freaking horse. So then he takes him to the backyard. This is where it's painful to watch, because the backyard is, like, a landscape New York City backyard. It's like a suburban home, and he takes Little Bear out there in some little box, and Little Bear walks out, and he sees like a big ass dandelion, walks through a few blades of grass, and he's just like, it's just like home. And it's just like, Jesus, man, really has that, like, natives need to connect to their land. You need to give them outside time, otherwise they're gonna go crazy. And then so immediately, like, Omri's like panicking. Oh, I gotta get you back inside. You know, I don't want anyone to see. And so he steals some of his dad's tools some of his tools and supplies so that Little Bear can make his longhouse. And then, like, rushes to, so while he's doing that, a bird comes in and, like, hits Little Bear in the thigh. Rushes him back inside. Little Bear's, like, bleeding out of his thigh. And he's like, I need husks. And he, basically to heal himself or to, like, bandage himself. He doesn't have any of that. So Omri goes through his brother's stuff and finds, like, a model set. And he finds a little English medic and takes him. And this is one of the more problematic scenes with this English medic. He meets Little Bear and says, he puts him in the cupboard, takes him out. And once again, there's no, like, great spirit. Oh, my God, it's a god. He immediately knows, like, oh, it's a kid. What the hell's going on? He doesn't have that moment where he's like, is this a dream? This is magic. It has to be. But at the same time, like, I think Omri got a little smart, and he's like, he immediately tells him, you're dreaming. I need help. But he immediately believes him. And then so the medic is placed next to Little Bear. And then he starts fixing him up real quick. And then he gets his wits about himself. And he's like, what? Well, and I quote, well, I'll be jiggered. A bloomin' engine. And he's fixing them up. And he just, like, stops. He doesn't give Little Bear a chance to respond. He just says, Custer's last stand, was it? Sitting Bull? And he takes his right hand and holds his palm out to next to his head. How? And Little Bear mimics him, and he says how back and puts his hand up exactly. And he's mimicking him, but he doesn't know. Like at this point, now watching it as an adult, Little Bear's doing it because the medic initiated it, not because that's how he greets people. Because how is, like Lakota Dakota, and it's like the male version of hello, basically. And he, geographically speaking, he's probably never heard that in his life. Little Bear being Onondaga regionally, he's probably never heard Lakota greetings or Lakota language at all. But unless you're an adult, you don't recognize that. As a kid, you might see them saying how together. You might think like, oh, that's what they say, how, just like, because there is no correction in this movie, even though there is like, anyway. So so the interaction continues, and I get this crap all the time. The how crap. It's like, they don't say how to me, but they'll like learn one thing, like non-native people, of like, oh, the long walk, right? Oh, code talkers? Oh, I learned that in school. And it like gives them an opportunity to like validate what they know. Of just like, oh yeah, I am smart. I am world traveled. Or I do know stuff. So Omri puts him back in the cupboard. And he's so excited he has like a pet Indian now. And so like all this time he's like, all this happened before he has to go to school. Then he's got to go to school. His mom comes in and Little Bear's like, who is that? He's like, oh, Ganoa, the mother? And so, yeah, it's just interesting. Anyway, Omri goes to school, gives Little Bear like tools and supplies for his longhouse, and then gives him an axe from a night toy. Like puts it in the cupboard, easy bake ovens it, and gives it back to him. And then their last interaction before he goes to get him breakfast, he gets him granola, blueberries, and cranberry juice. Because hunter-gatherer, right? So stupid. Anyway, so Omri tells Little Bear, I gotta go to school. And the concept of school is just so beyond Little Bear's thought comprehension. He's like, what? What's school for? And he's like, oh, it's a place I go to learn all day. And Little Bear, good. Go learn stories of your ancestors. While this is nice, it's wrong. Why couldn't he be going to school to learn how to fight, how to hunt, how to make tools, how to be a god? Because that's what he thinks he is. Instead, no. How to learn the stories of your ancestors. Such a romanticized thing to say. So Omri goes to school, and then he starts writing about Little Bear in his like journals. They have this like read aloud period, like the share part. And so he writes in his journal, and he says, he is a, oh, what did we see? Okay. He is a real Iroquois man. He talks, he eats, he trusts me. He's talking about Little Bear. And his friend Patrick, his Indian friend, he's sitting there in the classroom too, like, what the hell? That's the same freaking plastic Indian I gave you? And so he's like, bro, what the hell? And his teacher just, dismisses it. Kids with their silly imaginations. And so before Omri goes home, there's this random, like, diorama of, like, native, I don't know what it is. There's just a bunch of native figurines sitting out on a display somewhere, right in the hallway. And Omri jacks one of them. And it turns out that it's the Mohawk with the bow and arrow, the chief that ends up dying of the heart attack. And that's the only reason why he wants it. And so, flash to him going home, Little Bear just killed it. He's like basically done with the longhouse. But before that, there's a scene where he's like on the scaffolding. Or not, I'm sorry. He has like the frame of the longhouse built, and he's like sitting on top of it, and he hears randomly this rhythmic, like almost like drumming, like coming out of nowhere, where it's just like, and you're just like, what the heck is that drumming? And you just, but his dad, Omri's dad, is hammering, like doing some construction in the house. He's putting a skylight in his brother's room. And he hears that hammering in there. And Little Bear, what does he start doing? He starts singing. All of a sudden, you hear this native drum come into the freaking room, like into the background. and he just starts singing. I kid you not. I was just like, what the hell? And then the scene ends. That's it. There's no point to that. It just shows like, oh, Little Bear hears anything that resembles a drum, and immediately he needs to start singing. So when Omri finally gets home, Little Bear completely done with the longhouse. Killed it. Just done with it. You know, killer worker. Omri went to the library, apparently. He came with like 3 books, just like sprinting up the stairs, and like he throws the books on the bed. And you have to, and it's like a split second that these books are in frame, but I paused it. And 2 of the 3 books are visible. The titles are The Face of the Iroquois, and the other is Trail of the Iroquois. And the other is like a book that another 9-year-old wouldn't get. It's like super dense reading. These are all very thick books, clearly with no pictures. But I got excited. I'm like, hey, they're showing an opportunity where Omri's trying to learn more. Nope. There is no author. There is no publication of any kind. I looked these books up. They don't exist. So I don't know what they were trying to prove with that. But after that, he says, well, he's going to need a bow and arrow because tonight, now that my longhouse is done, I'm going to hunt for food and we'll cook meat and we'll tell stories. So to give him his bow and arrow, Omri shows him that plastic native figurine he got, the Mohawk guy. So he pops it into the easy bake oven cupboard, and Little Bear looks at it. He's like, "Can I watch? You know, great creator, spirit, whatever. Can I see you do what you do?" He's like, "Yeah, sure. Come on over." So he looks at it, and just by looking at the figurine, he's like, "Oh, he's Mohawk. He's like, they make excellent bows. You know, this is going to be awesome." And then he pops it open, takes the bow right out of his hands, and the old man has a heart attack. After he sees Omri, he's just like, Jesus, and dies. He's just like, man, that's crazy. And at this point, Little Bear's furious. This is where the illusion of Great Spirit starts to fade, because he realizes he's just a kid. He's like, what, you've never seen people die before? And Omri's like, no, I'm like shielded from death. I'm 9 years old. I've never seen death before. And he's just like, send him back where he came from. And he's just like so mad. And Little Bear, and I quote, says, "You should not do magic you do not understand. Send him back. He would want to be back." You know, he's like, you don't understand what you're playing with, kid. Like, you need to be more responsible about this. And that's kind of Little Bear's role in this movie, is to be, 1, misrepresented, but 2, to really be the moral compass for Omri, to let him know, like, hey, man, you can't be doing this shit. Like, you need to be more responsible. And then the next scene, his dad asks him, like, why is all my stuff missing? Where's all this stuff going? He lies to his dad and said he buried it in the backyard. And he's like, well, now I got to go to the hardware store. And this is a weird scene because Omri's like, no, I'll go by myself. I'm independent. I want to show that I'm, like, becoming a man. So he goes by himself. His dad gives him the money. Apparently this hardware store is only a block away. And after he leaves the hardware store, he gets mugged. But not really mugged. This like bully, maybe like a year older than him, just comes by, pushes him. He's like, give me your money, kid. And takes his change from whatever was left over from the hardware store. And this white kid has a mohawk. And Omri yells at him as he leaves, hey, come back. You don't deserve to have that hair. Like he knows anything at this point. He's only 9. He's only had Little Bear for 1 freaking day. This is clearly an attempt of the movie to show, like, hey, Omri, like, is woke. Omri knows what's going on. Omri knows what's up. Mohawk is a hairstyle. It's more than a hairstyle. It's an entire, nation of people. And then Omri's found by his buddy Patrick and his mom randomly in the street. They walk him home. And Patrick's just like, bro, what the hell's up with that Indian you were talking about? Is that thing really, like, true? So they go in, and his brothers are in there. They kick him out. So his brothers are, like, freaking out. They're like, oh, Omri, did you make this? This is fantastic. And he kicks his brothers out of the room. Kicks his brother's hamster in the ball, like, down the hallway, down the stairs, just to get him out. And then so Little Bear was hiding from the brothers, because when they came in, apparently they just like took his longhouse around and just like really examining it with a magnifying glass. So Little Bear's like hiding, and at this point Little Bear's like, fuck this, dude, like I want to get the hell out of here. You know, you got all these giant people running around, you're clearly a kid, you have no responsibility, get me out of here. And Omri's like, I can't send you home, my buddy Patrick's right here, I brought him to come see you. And Little Bear, and I quote, "Another great spirit? Make another little human?" And Omri promises, like, "Okay, I know how it went last time. Like, I'm not going to do that again, I promise." But Patrick, he brought him a cowboy because he wants Omri to make a cowboy for him. So when Omri is then, like, called out of his room by his mom. He's like, "Omri, get over here. I heard you got mugged." And as soon as he leaves, what does Patrick do? Freaking pops it into the Easy Bake Oven cupboard. And out comes Boone, a.k.a. Boohoo Boone. And Boone's in shock, but he thinks he's like in a drunken stupor. He thinks like, "Oh, I drank too much of the sauce last night." He never thinks that Omri is a god. Not once. He's like, "What the hell are these two big-ass kids doing here?" That's all he thinks. And he gets freaked out. And he shoots Patrick, and they're all like trying to gather themselves. And Patrick has to go home. And now he's got Omri and Boone left in his room, these two tiny people. And Patrick's like, "I want the cowboy. Bring him to me tomorrow." And Omri's trying to come talk him off the ledge of like, "Bro, this is a lot of responsibility. These are real people. You can't just like take them home. They're not a toy." And Patrick's like, bring it tomorrow. Bring him to school. But don't bring him together. You know, cowboys and Indians. And at that point, Boone overheard that. And he's just like, "What? What did you say? Indians?" And then immediately he like scans the room looking for the Indian, quote unquote. And immediately he like once he like gets to the other side of the bed, he sees Little Bear across the room. And he says, and I quote, "Redskins." And he takes out his gun to shoot him. And thankfully Omri prevents it, like picks him up and he's like, "All right, calm down, little buddy." Puts him in like a sock drawer. He's like, "What in the tarnation? I don't care how big you are, I'll end you." You know, he's got a little bit of Yosemite Sam in him. But he throws out so many of these like racial freaking lines throughout this entire movie. As soon as he puts him down, Boone says to Omri, "You better watch out for that savage. Don't scalp you in your sleep." And Omri just like closes the door. He's like, "All right, that's enough out of you." He's closing the sock drawer, and Boone yells at him, "Injun lover!" And once again, nobody corrects him. Nobody says, like, this is wrong. Nobody expresses any, like, "Jesus, that was really uncomfortable." Or, "Man, what year is he from? Things were really messed up back then." At no point does that ever happen. So flash to the outside. Omri wants to make amends because Little Bear is, like, still pissed at him. And this bothers me. Omri pops a toy deer, into the cupboard. And he puts it in front of Little Bear, and he releases it into the backyard. And then as soon as he releases it to the backyard, he lets Little Bear go after it, and Little Bear's walking after him with a bow and arrow. And Little Bear freaking like looks up at Omri like, "Bro, we're cool. Thank you for doing this. This is exactly what I need. I needed to hunt." And it's just like, he could have just freaking killed the damn deer. He needs meat. Little Bear wouldn't have cared. Even perpetuating this like romanticized idea of natives, like, we need to feel the connection to the land. We need to hunt, otherwise we'll feel lost. Of course, this makes everything right, and of course he kills the deer. You know, it's just like, oh gosh, that just bothered me. It's just like, almost like you are. It really is treated like a pet, of like, "Oh, I gotta feed the pet today," and you feed the pet, and the pet loves you now, and that's exactly what this felt like. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous. Little Bear, no joke, if he was a real person, wouldn't have gave a shit if he had just like brought the deer to life, broke its neck, and be like, "Here's some meat." You know, "Oh, thanks, great spirit, I appreciate it. Thanks, man. Now I don't gotta go through all the trouble like running through these woods to go find a deer." Anyway, so he finally kills it, and man, this is one of the more problematic things. So they killed that Mohawk guy, right? Omri got scolded, so they ended up wrapping it up in some like cloth, and they're like, "You gotta bury him." And Little Bear yells at him, "You need to bury him. You need to give him a proper burial." So while Little Bear is out hunting the deer, Omri's in the backyard using a little, like a trowel, basically. And he digs a grave for this toy, well, at this point it's a real person, Mohawk. And Omri sees Little Bear had just taken the kill for the deer. And I quote, "Now we become reconciled as you start away." He says this in English. He doesn't say it in Onondaga. This isn't translated from Onondaga. He says this shit in English. "Now we become reconciled as you start away." Just to show you the connection to the land, I guess. I have no idea what that was about. And so that was cringy, but what was even more cringy is Omri is holding that dead Mohawk chief in his hands, and he says verbatim the exact same thing that Little Bear just said. Instead, this booming, cathartic music comes up, like there's an epiphany that Omri has. It says, "Now we become reconciled as you start away." Ugh. Just ugh. And he puts the thing in the ground, covers it with the little trowel, and the music gets even louder. Like, oh wow, we're really learning something here. We're learning a lot about natives. We're learning a lot about how they treat the land and people and death. Well, two things. Death, burial, like killing something, is completely different than like losing an actual member of your community. Completely different. When you're taking a life to provide meat for your family. There's a different offering that you make for that. To use that same language and thought process to apply it to somebody going on to the next life, to the next world, to, the afterlife, or just leaving this earth, that's a completely different thing. But that's what this movie is. And so at some point, Little Bear expresses to him, like, I need a wife. It's really weird that he ever mentions that. But the next day, like, Omri's like, I gotta go to school, but I can't leave one of you here. So even though Patrick told me not to bring both of you, I'm just gonna bring both of you. And he takes both of them to school, and it really, like, they bond. That's basically where this goes. And we find out, sadly, so they're like bonding in a fanny pack that Omri took them in. And it's revealed that Little Bear's family died of smallpox. Like, Boone's bawling his eyes out at this point. They never explicitly say how they died. The scene just starts and Boone's like, smallpox? And he's like, yeah, smallpox. And your kid too? Yeah. And Little Bear, and I quote, I will heal when I have another child. And he just, they're just like sad. And they end up bonding. They end up hanging out. And they end up like becoming friends, it seems. That doesn't prevent Boone from dropping the racial slurs. But eventually Patrick and Omri have a fight over the toys. And they have like a Toy Story moment where they gotta like play dead to pretend in front of an adult. But then at the end of the day, Omri, despite all this crap he's like gone through and all this crap that he's seen, he goes back to the same damn diorama because Little Bear the night before mentioned to him, I need a wife. I'm lonely. He goes to that diorama, he plucks one of the native ladies from it, and he just goes home. And then he shows it to Little Bear. At the end of the day, he shows it to Little Bear. He's like, what's that? It's your wife. And Little Bear's like, what? And I quote, a wife? But my mother should choose a wife. Thank you, Little Bear. Thank you for bringing some awareness to this freaking movie. Your mom's going to help you choose your wife. At least at that point in time, 1971, in Onondaga culture, I'm sure that's something closer to what would happen. But none of the... gosh. Omri is so irresponsible. Nobody checks him on this. He just like throwing shit against the wall and see what sticks. And Omri, right immediately after that, says, and I quote, but your mother's not here. Yeah, thanks for the reminder, dick. It's just like, ugh. So there's a snafu, however. Omri's brother apparently lashed out, hid the cupboard from him. And he has to go through this instance, basically because of all the rat ball hamster stuff that's been going on. He like got back at his brother and hid his cupboard. So he's got to go find it. When he finds the cupboard, he realizes the key is gone. And so now Omri breaks the news to Boone and Little Bear. And like, hey man, like we got the cupboard back, but the key's not here. You guys can't go back. I'm sorry. I don't know what's going to happen. And so Boone and Little Bear, they're just like depressed. They're like, shit, I got to stay here in this freaking world where I'm tiny. You guys are massive. You guys are children. You're irresponsible. And so they're like, well, I guess we got to hunker down and just deal with this. So then the whole family leaves for the night for whatever reason. And then so Patrick and Omri are having a sleepover. And they're up late watching TV. And Motley Crue girls music videos like blaring on the television. And it was like an uncomfortable, like Boone's like, oh, this is disgusting display, blah, blah, blah. I mean, really, you could tell he was enjoying it. And then they changed the channel to National Geographic. And then Boone was like, hey, let me see that clicker there. And he changes it one more time. And then the film, I had to look this up. The last of his tribe comes on. It's supposedly about the Yahi Nation. And this is like a massacre movie. So the scenes on the TV as Little Bear and Boone are watching and Patrick and Omri, the kids, like it's just natives getting massacred. It's 100% just natives running in one direction, people shooting guns, and they're just getting shot. Little Bear is like, at this point, he's depressed because he can't go back home. He can't go back and, you know, he was supposedly seeing his nephew, helping him go through like a manhood kind of journey and helping him go through this like coming of age ceremony. He was in the middle of that when he ended up in the cupboard. And so he's like thinking about that, and then he hears these gunshots and screams on TV. He looks over and he's just like horrified. He hears it and he's like in pain. You visibly watch him in pain. You know, flash to Boone when he sees those people getting shot, and I quote, Apaches, the ugliest redskins to walk the face of the earth. He breaks out his gun and points it at the screen, and as the screen's flashing to different natives on the screen, he's like moving his gun, you know, like it's freaking like it's Duck Hunt. You know, he's like shooting, like he's gonna shoot these natives on the screen. And Omri and Patrick have no awareness. They have no idea. Like, they're not paying attention to these two at all. Boone is happy as hell, too, the whole time. He's like, get 'em, boys! Hell yeah! And Little Bear is just a mess. He's so sad. You know, he wants to help. And so, in turn, while Boone's pointing his gun at the screen, Little Bear takes out his bow. And he's pointing at the screen, too. Every time he sees a white guy, he, like, aims at him. And then Boone just automatically, like, he has his arrow knocked on his bow. And Boone, like, hoops and hollers. And he spooks Little Bear, and Little Bear turns around and shoots the arrow right into Boone's heart, or, you know, his heart area. And after that, he's like, amigo, Little Bear, what happened? And then he, like, falls over. I wasn't sad. I wasn't sad one bit. There was supposed to be, like, a moment in the film where you're like, oh no, Little Bear and Boone, they just bonded. Look at that. With everything that was going on at that point, he was legit an enemy. He was cheering on. He was celebrating the death of all the natives on TV. And Little Bear shot him with an arrow because he thought he was a threat. I felt nothing. As an adult. As a kid, I was crushed because I was like, they were friends. Mom, what's going to happen? But so then Omri is like, I need a medic, but I freaking lost the key, you know? We can't even get you guys back, let alone find a medic to help Boone out. And then eventually they find out that it fell between the floorboards and the rat is like escaped under the floorboards. And so Little Bear's got to be brave, go fit in there. They get the key, you know, long story short. They get the key back. And then once they get the key back, they bring that English medic back. And he helps Boone. You know, he lets him know, like, hey, he's going to be okay, thankfully. Everybody goes to sleep that night. Omri's left alone. He's creeping around as soon as Patrick, Little Bear, and Boone are asleep. He's creeping around the room. He goes, even though he was explicitly told by Little Bear, like, no more people. He takes that native figurine lady. He was going to put her in the cupboard and bring her back to surprise Little Bear. And Little Bear notices, and he's like, no, Omri. And I quote, no, Omri. She has a life. She has a family, a clan, maybe a husband and a child. And Omri says, like, I don't want you to be alone. And then he just tells him, like, send me back, bro. I'm done with this shit. That's basically where Little Bear's at. Like, Little Bear's like, you got your cupboard fixed. Send me back. You don't want me to be alone? Send me back home. Then they go to bed. Next morning, Little Bear is like gonna go home. Boone's gonna go home. Little Bear's doing some dance around a fire in front of the longhouse, and I'm not sure what the point is. They never explain it. I'm not sure what he's saying in his dance. I don't know where he got his rattle that he's using for the dance. But he's doing a dance, and like Boone's trying to imitate him. You know, he's got a wound, but he's like trying to dance. Boone trying to mimic him. But then after he's done dancing, Boone's like, "Hey, Little Bear, what are you gonna do when this is all over? When you get back, what are you gonna be doing?" Little Bear, and I quote, "I'm gonna go back to hunt with my brother's son. Hope I wake up in the woods. It's quiet, and the nights are getting cold. I can almost smell the trees." Boone smiles, and he looks at Little Bear, and he goes, "Lord, I can almost smell them too. It's like I'm part Indian now, my own damn self." Unfortunately, this is growth for Boone. He went from saying Injun to savage, redskin, to now actually saying Indian. As ignorant as this is, it's actually progress for this character. And Little Bear tells Omri, if you were Indian, quote, "if you were Indian, it would be time for you to do a walk through the forest too. You know, like my nephew that I'm doing." Really, Little Bear? Indian? You wouldn't say if you were Onondaga? You're going to assume that every Indian nation, every native nation, all has a walk through the forest, all has a coming-of-age male story that's exactly the same. I'm saying this sarcastically because I know that's not true. I'm saying this because Little Bear would never say that. Little Bear would say, if you were Onondaga, this is what would be happening. He wouldn't say if you were Indian. Jesus. Anyway, we're at the end, people. Almost a few more minutes. The plot. So anyway, I don't know. Let's just get to the end of it. The last part. So when they finally say, "All right, let's go, buddy." Right when they get in the cupboard, Boone and Little Bear. Little Bear first, and I quote, "Great Spirit." At this point in the movie, why is he still calling him Great Spirit? I don't understand. Well, after all the crap they went through, why is he still calling him Great Spirit? Anyway, and I quote, "Great Spirit, tell me about the Onondaga. Are we always a great people?" Omri, "You are always a great people, but it's not always so good." "Things change for us?" Omri, "They will." And at this point, it's really emotional. You can see the emotion on Litefoot's face, on Little Bear's face. You're just like, man, yeah, you think you're great people right now in 1761, but shit gets bad. He doesn't explain any of it, but you can just see on Omri's face because he knows what's going to happen. But they never explain it. Not once. They even allude to what happens. And then the last scene of the movie, Omri's reading his journal again to the class. "I'll never know where he is now or how he is, but now I don't worry about him anymore. I think Little Bear will have lots of children, and he will teach them everything. He will always take care of his people. That's all." And then the movie ends. Thank God. So let's go for positives. There aren't very many. But they tried to get some stuff right. They tried. I gotta recognize intent, like with Pocahontas. They tried correcting the longhouse to teepee issue, talking about... I really think that this is accurate costume design for the era. I tried looking up what I could online. You know, it's only so good online, but they did consult with the Smithsonian, the National Museum of American Indian. They did consult with a few museums. In the video game, the PC video game, which I never heard of, but apparently was popular and like really stuck with a lot of people because, I mean, it was a video game about the movie. I watched a walkthrough of YouTube. Somebody like recorded the gameplay of the entire PC game. This game, why didn't they make this game into the movie? Because when I watched, I watched most of it. But in the game, they actually got with the Smithsonian National Museum and the American Indian for the video game. They got the actors to do voiceover in the video game. They told oral Onondaga stories. Like legit, you would go through these side quests and they would like have these animations of like one of the ones that stuck out to me was why the bear has such a short tail. They told how it lost its tail when it was tricked by the fox to use it as a fish, to use his like long tail as a, to fish for some, fish, basically use it as a bait, and stuck his tail into the lake like while leaning over a rock, and then like it flashed over, the lake froze over, and then the bear was stuck, and when he pulled himself up, he ended up like tearing off most of his tail. That's why the bear has such a stubby tail. Talks about why people are named certain things, why people are dressed a certain way in the village. I even talked about the different types of homes they use in the village, different types of clothing, to discuss the significance of wampum and beading and using certain materials for their things, and talked about the significance of constellation and Onondaga stories. I'm just like, why didn't they make that? Where is this TV show? Where is this information? This is great information. If this is just me at a cursory review, it seemed accurate. It seemed pretty relevant. They put more effort into the video game in terms of getting it right than the movie. None of that made it to the movie. So on to the negatives. Little Bear is stupid in this movie. Like he just doesn't have awareness. He doesn't. There's a scene where right before they take Little Bear outside for the first time, before he gets attacked by the bird. Little Bear's like, oh, what's that? He literally, like, he's miming that he's stuck in a box. He reaches his hands out and he's like touching around him because the window's open. He's feeling a draft come through the room. And he's just like, oh, what's that? What's that? He's like, for feeling the wind. He's like, I've never felt that before in my life. They don't have a wind in my universe. And he's like, well, yeah, let's go outside. Outside? What's outside? What is that? Just like, Jesus. Throughout the entire movie, in subtitles, speaking Iroquois. Come on, people. What's the next I got? Boone comes out. So once again, I talked about that. Like, Little Bear being like, oh, creator, great spirit. And then when Boone comes out, when the medic comes out, like, oh, hey, kid. Like, they just get it. And a negative, my wife looked this up. This has a fucking 73% on Rotten Tomatoes. Are you kidding me? That's the critic side. There's only 22 reviews, but on the audience side, they have more sense. There's like 60,000 audience reviews, and it has a 40%. Final thoughts. This is going to be just a tad over an hour. I apologize, but final thoughts. This movie was a problem because those kids that watch this movie are like me now. They're adults. This book series, those kids that were given those books in school are 40-year-olds now. The kids that watched this movie when they were kids are now 30-year-olds, 29, late 20s, early 30s. So you have like a good generation of kids who use these books and movies to frame their mindset of natives. This movie was shown to kids like around the globe too. It wasn't just like this was a world-renowned book. And there was a lot of hype around this movie because it was a book. The same kids that watch this, they're the same ones that ask us, what your Indian name is. So a real quick story. I used to get asked that all the time. What's your Indian name? I never knew where that came from. So I played golf growing up. And in Tuba City, there's no golf courses. The nearest golf course is like an hour away at least. My dad got me into it because he just went and played it one time. And so we used to travel down to Phoenix to play in golf tournaments. I would play in junior tournaments. And in these junior tournaments, I was always the only minority or like handful of minorities. And when I would play and I get paired up with these like non-native kids, they would always, it would just come up. They're like, oh, Tuba City, I never heard of that place. I'm like, yeah, it's on the reservation on the Navajo Res. And they'd be like, oh, Navajo Res? At some point during the round, almost every single kid I met, do you have an Indian name? And shit like Indian in the Cupboard perpetuates that crap. Like those people that I talked to, they're adults now. They had those thoughts at one point, and I don't know if that was ever corrected. I say corrected like it should, like it's blatantly wrong. Like that their mindset was just framed by some kind of information. And I don't know where that can be corrected where that can be augmented to be a little more thoughtful. But it affected me growing up because I didn't have an Indian name, quote unquote. I didn't have a Navajo name, you know. Like, they're not always given to everybody. Not everybody has a native name, like, in their culture. Not everybody does that. So when I didn't have one, I used to ask my mom, like, Mom, why don't I have an Indian name? Why don't I? And she was just like, but you have a name, Ian. Ian. My middle name is Claw, after my great-grandfather. That's just a long story and for another time. But that's the closest thing I have to an Indian name, quote-unquote. And I thought I was a lame Indian. Once again, lame Indian thing with Ian. I thought I was a crappy Indian because I didn't have a native name. And I didn't want to, like, tell other people that I didn't have one. And Indian in the Cupboard, these movies, they give us a complex. It, like, all trickles down and eventually makes its way back to us. This movie doesn't care about anything. Doesn't care to correct anything. Little Bear has to do all the correcting. Little Bear is the only moral compass in this movie. At no point does the kid, the humans, the teacher, the other kid, like Patrick, the teacher, they don't correct any of the cultural misrepresentation. Indian, savage, redskins, uncivilized. All of that is thrown around and nobody says anything verbally, or, I mean, there's very few non-verbal, like, oh, that was weird, but it's not. I don't know, it's crazy. Okay, and this is a real story. No joke, no cap, as the kids say. I thought Onondaga and Iroquois were gone when I was a kid. Like, extinct. No joke. Southwest kid, Navajo, no joke. I thought they were gone because of this movie. Because every time I read anything on, like, Iroquois Confederacy and all that stuff in history, like, it was all in the past. There was no, like, and here's where they are today. And here's what they look like today. And here's where they currently reside. It was none of that. I no joke thought they were gone. And when I met an Onondaga at college, I was just like, holy shit. Like, a part of my brain was like, they're real, you know? Part of that is, like, the worldview of Navajos is very centric. It's very Navajo-centric. And I think that's its own thing. That's its own podcast to talk about. I think a large part of that is, I mean, that's why we have Indian tacos and Navajo tacos. So there's a part of that. You know, it's the same thing. It's just Navajos like to put their own name on it. So I think that has to do with that, me thinking the Onondagas were gone, but also me being in Arizona my entire life. I seriously never... I met other native kids that were like Lakota, Hopi, Blackfeet, you know, but never any from, like, back east, so I didn't know. But because of movies like Indian in the Cupboard, how was I supposed to know? And the interesting thing was, in college too, when you get there and you major in NAS, like Native American Studies, I always got the question, well, aren't you Native? Don't you... Why are you majoring in Native American Studies? Because this shit wasn't taught to me, bro. Like, that's what they use. That's my response now. My brain is so messed up that I didn't think an entire race of people didn't exist because of TV and media and books and the history that was taught to me. My mindset didn't fathom that there were other native kids on the other side of the country that were just alive, you know? And as soon as I started learning stuff in NAS, Native American Studies, I'm like, man, I want to learn more. I want to know more. It's crazy. All right, let's get to the last part. Would I show this to my... No. I'm not showing this to my son. Sorry, Litefoot. I'm not showing this to my son, buddy. Hey, he should have kept acting. I liked Litefoot. I liked Litefoot's work. He was pretty decent. This movie's trash, but he did okay. It didn't age well at all. I think at the time it probably looked like progress, and it probably looked like they were making steps in the right direction. But unlike Pocahontas, really, I think other older movies from my childhood, there's no nostalgic moments in this. Outside of that VHS tape story, when you could, like, flip the cover inside out to make it look like a cupboard, there's no nostalgia with this. It's not a good movie. It's on Netflix, so that's why I wanted to watch it. It just came on this month, and so people can watch this if they would like, and watch it along with this podcast. Not watch it along, but watch it and then listen to this podcast. What sucks though is this movie tried. This is like this is what effort looked like in 1995. It was worse before this because there was no effort, but still, just Hollywood couldn't get out of its own way on this one. I just didn't like that. I don't recommend this film. Check out some of the clips on YouTube. Honestly, like if you didn't see this recently, like go listen to it on YouTube. Go watch the clips on YouTube. But mostly just to see the special effects. Like the special effects is the only thing that holds up in this entire movie. This movie didn't make any money, thankfully. So this is my last thing. This movie didn't make any money because it came out at the same time. When this came out, Apollo 13, Batman Forever, and Pocahontas were out. So thank God for those 3 movies. Otherwise, we would have saw more of these. There were 5 of these books. They were planning on making 5 of these movies. Can you imagine? Ugh. There's some alternate universe where there are 5 of these movies. That's the worst universe. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're really trying to keep consistent to the Saturday episode. Next week, in the next couple of weeks, I'm gonna do a moment in history. I'm still gonna try to stick to that 1 episode of like a moment in history per month. I'm gonna do Wes Studi's honorary Oscar. That's a moment in history. He's the first Native American to win an Oscar. So look for that. Martin Sensmeyer and Kiowa Gordon's TV show, The Liberator, came out recently. It's got Forrest Goodluck in it too, about the Thunderbirds. At some point I'll do that too. It's a 4-part series on Netflix. It's really just a 3-hour movie they broke into 45-minute chunks. That's some good Native representation in it. I watched the first couple episodes. I'm probably going to do that before year end because that's kind of got a lot of popularity around it right now. But you look out for Indian Horse, Wes Studi's Oscar episode, The Liberator probably at some point, and then Magnificent Seven. I'll be doing some of those Hostels. If you guys have any other suggestions for movies, please go to the website, check it out, send me a message. I respond. I monitor that pretty actively. Shoot me a message on Instagram if you have any feedback or comments for future movies, and that's pretty much it. All right, everybody. Y'all have a good one. It's a good day to be Indigenous.